Chapter 19, being a full account of the happenings in the dark sewers. Jimmy headed for the only safe place he knew, the sewers. He scrambled along the docks, and the prince dogged him every step of the way. Jimmy turned on him like a cornered rat. "Ain't you done enough? You got a price put on my head? Go home and go to the blazes." "But you're my friend," the prince stated, as if he were issuing a royal decree. "Don't count on it," replied Jimmy. He started down stone steps to the river, but the prince stopped him with a sudden urgent yell. "Look!" Looming on the cobblestone wayside came the hulk of a hold-your-nose Billy with Cutwater following as close as a cow's tail. Jimmy didn't wait to be spotted, but it was too late. The big outlaw, his hair and beard looking bonfire red under the bright sun, gave a distant yell and altered course. Jimmy and the prince took their stairs and leaps. The tide was coming in, and the mud flat had shrunk to the width of the path. Jimmy led the way through the tarred forest on the wharf pilings and over a derelict river barge. He leaped off into the shallow water. He could already see the great brick mouth of the main sewer. "Don't leave footprints in the mud," he warned. They splashed along the water's edge and were there. The arched sewer stood tall enough for the horse and the rider. Jimmy leaped the mud and was in. But the prince balked. "It's black as night in there." "Jump quick." The prince steeled himself and made the leap. Jimmy advanced into the tunnel, but the prince held back. "Follow me. We'll be lucky if they didn't catch the sight of us." The prince stood terrified of the darkness ahead. He had turned dead white. Jimmy made a grab and yanked the prince after him. "You'll get me caught." I'm scared, Jimmy." "Don't fret about the dark. There are rats in here. Even grown men are scared of them. Hang on to me." Deeper and deeper and darker, they sloshed through the carnivorous sewer. The gutters of the city overhead had dried, but old rain seeped and dripped from the glazed brick walls. Soon the mouth had receded little more than a pinhole of light, and Jimmy stopped to catch his breath. "Blacker than a stack of black cats in here, ain't it? We should come to another passage before long. They'll never find us. Ease off my arm. You'll break it." "Jimmy," hardly above a breath, the prince's voice was stiff with fear. "Jimmy," not Jimmy from the streets, not boy. The wonder of it, Jimmy thought, like we was old knockout friends on the streets. I wish I were like you," muttered the prince. Jimmy was amazed. "Like me? You're not afraid of anything." "Course I am. I'm afraid your paw'll hang me." "Not likely." Jimmy gave a small snort. "Not likely unless you give away my hiding place down here." "Do you think I'd do that, Jimmy?" "I don't know. Let's keep moving." As they edged along the wet walls, Jimmy gave his reply a second thought. He'd wronged the prince. This wasn't the same Prince Brat who'd run away the night before, bored with his own menaceness and haughtiness and cruelty. "Reckon I do trust you," said Jimmy. And the prince replied, "I won't go back to the castle unless you go with me." Gaw! The main sewer branched off, and Jimmy had to stop to get his bearings. Carefully thought, "That passage to the left leads to the brewery. You could get eaten alive. Keep to the right branch." In the hollowness of the sewer, there came a soft scurrying of feet, and then the distinct squeaking sound. The prince's fingers locked on Jimmy's arm like a manacle. "Nothing but a rat," Jimmy said. "2 of 'em, but nothing to worry about yet. Dark ain't so bad if you know what's in it, like off to the left, so hang on to me." The prince's voice was almost inaudible. "What's to the left?" "A brewery overhead. They empty their used-up grain down in the sewer, and the rats feed and breed by the hundreds, grow big as a street cats, and short-tempered. They'll swarm all over if you hang on by their teeth." Still clinging on the birdcage, Jimmy continued feeling his way along. He wondered how he'd ever felt as home in these dank, smelly sewers. Then a sudden flicker of the light from the side passage stopped him. He peered down the tunnel and saw a figure with a candle fixed to the stiff bill of his cap. A rat catcher. He could see a cage full of squealing rats. He entered the passage, and the man looked up. "Who goes there?" "Didn't mean to give you a scare," Jimmy whispered. "This is no place for boys." The man's full voice boomed and echoed through the sewers, and Jimmy took a quick look behind. Hold it down, sir," he said softly, and then he thought he recognized the rat catcher. "Ain't you old Johnny Tosher?" With the candle glowing from his hat, Bill. The man bent forward. I declare, is that you, Jimmy? It is. Ain't you grown since you left these sewers? I'd be obliged if you snuff your candle, sir. There's bloodthirsty ruffians after us. Speak up, said the old man, cupping a hand to his ear. Is it true you've got taken up by the king himself? That's the gossip. What are you doing back in the sewers? Running for our lives, eh? Your candle give us away. What's that? You'd do us a kindness to pinch it out. Speak up, lad. Now you're king's little gentlemen. They learn you talk in whispers. Come back for a visit, have you? Oh, your pa'd be proud. He gave the top of Jimmy's head a pat. They say you're Prince Brat's own whipping boy. Suddenly the rat catcher straightened. Who's there? Looming up in the yellow glow stood an immense hairy figure and a rattlebone man. Jimmy's heart stopped cold. What the blazes? Roared Hold Your Nose Billy. They flumbuxed us, Cutwater. That one ain't the prince. It's the other. I heard, Cutwater cried. We whipped the prince himself. Worse'n common murder, you know. The king will skin us alive by the inches. Mercy on us. But not if he don't find out. Both lurched forward to grab the boys. Jimmy swung the birdcage, knocking the candle flying. The flame sputtered out in the murky water, and the sewer was thrown into sudden darkness. Run for it, Jimmy yelled out. I got one, cackled Cutwater. That's me you got, bellowed the rat catcher's scurvy riffraff. Who are you? Jimmy flattened himself against the wall and found the prince already there. He heard a splash and a curse, and Hold Your Nose Billy must have tumbled over Cutwater and the rat catcher. In an urgent whisper, the prince asked, Which way? Jimmy made an instant decision. The villains might be able to run them down in the smaller side channel back to the main sewer. He gave the prince's sleeve a quick tug, and the prince reached out for Jimmy's hand. Off they went linked together while the outlaws untangled themselves. Which way do we go? Cried Cutwater. Listen for him. Jimmy froze. He didn't breathe. He waited, and he became suddenly aware of the prince's hand clasped in his own. His first impulse was withdraw his fingers, but the prince was hanging on for dear life. It was the same as the handshake, and he remembered the prince's own words. It felt friendly and trusting, but the wonder of it, shaking hands with the Prince Brat. Stop where you stand, warned Hold Your Nose Billy. Wherever you are, we'll catch you, added Cutwater. You'll never make it out. Which way was out? Snapped the big outlaw. The same way you came in, answered the rat catcher. Put your back to the breeze from the main sewer. That was wrong. Good old Tosher Jimmy thought. He meant to send them off in the opposite direction. Jimmy tugged on the prince's hand, and they scuttled along the wall toward freedom. A moment later, Jimmy could feel the stronger breeze, and he knew that they were in the main sewer again. Noses to the breeze, they could make a run for the river. But in his sudden elation, Jimmy banged into the wall with the birdcage. His hair rose. The clatter was so loud enough to wake the dead, or bring the villains running. Jimmy made an abrupt turn, pulling the prince deeper into the main sewer, and he whispered, They'll see us against daylight before we can get out. More holes than wormwood down here. We'll duck into another side tunnel, but if we break loose, don't lose your bearings. The brewery's dead ahead. The sound of feet sloshing through the water silenced them. Jimmy felt desperately for the mouth of the side tunnel, but Hold Your Nose Billy and Cutwater had already rushed onto the main sewer. Which way, Billy? Muttered Cutwater. Jimmy flattened himself against the grave, cold wall, but the prince seemed suddenly to rebel at being chased down like a sewer rat. He yanked the birdcage out of Jimmy's hand and flung it with all his might. It banged and clattered off the bricks in the direction of the brewery. What's that? Cried out Cutwater. Them is what? Put your back to the breeze, straight on. They barged ahead. Only moments later, old Tosher appeared across the great sewer, a fresh candle lit on the bill of his cap. And then Hold Your Nose Billy and Cutwater came flying back. I'm bit, help! Grain-fed rats were swarming over the two of them, nipping and biting and clinging like leeches. In the light of the candle, Cutwater waved his arms widely. He screeched, and the hairy outlaw bellowed. I declare, said the prince, they look like they're wearing fur coats. Chapter 20, in which the sun shines and we learn what befell the whipping boy, the prince, and everyone else. Standing in the clear sunshine, the prince breathed in the sweet fresh air. Then he looked at Jimmy squarely in the eyes. We're going back to the castle. Not me. Your pa's put a price on my head, of mine. No thank you, Prince. I don't fancy doing a jig from the end of a rope. Where will you hide for the rest of your life? In the sewers? I'd have them searched end to end. Gah, what a fool he'd been to let the prince in his best hiding place. Jimmy was on the verge of running, but where to go? How far would he get? You said you trusted me, declared the prince, but I can see you didn't mean it. I mean it, up to a point. Then follow me. It was a command. Jimmy swallowed hard and followed. They weren't at the castle gates yet. He'd think of something. The prince led him back to the fairgrounds and searched out Betsy and the hot potato man. You've served your prince nobly, he had announced. What are you talking about, lad? Replied Captain Nibbs. Hot potatoes. The king has offered a reward for the whipping boy. Here he stands. Turn him in. And Jimmy stood dumbfounded. He felt betrayed. Gah! Betsy flashed her eyes. Turn him in. Turn Jimmy in. I'll do no such thing. I command it. Who are you to command anything? I'm Prince Brat. Ha! Run for it, Jimmy thought. Deeply wounded, he gave the prince a last blazing look. The prince returned a quick, playful wink. It befuddled Jimmy for an instant, and then, in a flash, Jimmy saw that for the first time the prince was up to kindly piece of mischief. Head to toe, he's Prince Brat, said Jimmy. Better do what he says, or he'll have you boiled in oil. Jimmy had to wait with Betsy, Petunia, and Captain Nips while the prince was alone with the king. Finally, a pair of golden doors were opened, and the group was ushered into the throne room. The king sat on his legs crossed, and the merest flicker of a smile on his lips. Betsy bowed, and Captain Nips did the best he could. The reward is yours, the king announced, and then he turned to the prince. What about the bear? Came to your rescue, did he? Couldn't we give him the title of official dancing bear to your royal majesty, Papa? He'd draw crowds wherever he went. Done. Betsy and Captain Nips were dismissed. Jimmy now stood alone, it seemed hours, while the king gazed at him. He began to feel a noose tightening around his neck. You ought to be whipped. Yes, my lord. Prince Horace has caused enough mischief to wear out the hides of a dozen whipping boys. He tells me it's thanks to you that he's back sound and safe. The king thanks you. Jimmy took a small breath. You are placed under the prince's protection under one condition. He has sworn to do his lessons, blow out his night candle, and otherwise behave himself. Jimmy's eyes flicked to the prince. Gaw, he thought. You must want me for a friend awful bad to promise all that. So help me. If it's a friend you ran off looking for, it's a friend you found. Dismissed, both of you, said the king. But do change out of those smelly clothes. Retreating toward the golden doors, the prince beside him, Jimmy felt a sparkle rise into his eyes. You got me off without so much as a single whack, he whispered. I couldn't bear all the yowling and the bellowing. I wouldn't yowl and bellow. But I would, Jimmy, and Jimmy caught the twinkle in his eye. Almost as the doors, they were stopped by the king's voice. One more thing, the king broke into a smile. You could warm your hands over. If you boys decide to run away again, take me with you. In the days that followed, ballad sellers began to cry out new and final verses to the notorious life of Hold-Your-Nose Billy and his partner Cutwater. An old rat catcher had seen them flee from the sewer, and he'd seen them stow away aboard a ship, raising its sails for a long voyage. It was a convict ship bound for a speck of an island in a distant waters, a convict island.